going on, everybody? It is time for another episode of
In the Truck Again.
In the Truck Again.
I almost said it. I almost said it.
So we get this question a lot. Actually, we got it a lot during the old forum days, and I've seen it a couple of times on the comments in our videos. But the question is, how does daylight savings affect the fish? Ryan, you want to answer that?
It doesn't.
Last time I checked, bass do not have watches.
I can't believe people would take the time to think of that question. They're thinking hard enough to say, how would this affect the bass? But they can't think that fish don't use
watch.
Yep, they don't use time. Clocks.
Okay. Hey, subscribe to my channel. Anyway, so what the real topic of today is, what we're going to talk about.
All right, so we just had, was it Stella? I think they called it Winter Storm Stella.
Yeah, something like that.
We just had a massive, I think they call it like an Arctic mass air cold movement, whatever those. The whole country just experienced a massive cold front. So this is really going to apply to everyone today, and we're going to talk about pre-front conditions and post-front conditions, and kind of talk about what's going on, you know, with this time of year. And you know, everyone's kind of experiencing different phases of the spawn. Only a few places in the country have actually had their fish spawn, so everyone was affected by this cold sweep. I mean, this was a massive, it's a polar vortex. That's what
I don't care what it's called.
Everyone was affected by this polar vortex known as Winter Storm Stella, and it really affected everyone the same way, just at different depth zones. And so we're going to talk about how your fish most likely were affected and where they went and how to get back on them, because it's going to stay cold for a couple days more, and we want you guys to catch some fish, and we want to catch some fish. So it's freezing.
So prior to the cold storm, whatever vortex crap they called it, the bass were pretty much eating really good. It had warmed up. Everything was in pre-spawn.
A lot of the country was warm.
Yeah, a lot of the country was warm. Their water warmed up. The bass were happy. They were feeding. They moved up shallow. We were catching them on moving baits, you know, chatter baits, lipless crankbaits, spinner baits, you name it. And then the cold front hits.
This one was a doozy.
Yep, and these bass really wanted to spawn early because they were very happy, and the water temperature had gotten up into the high 50s, at least around here, and then, of course, a little further south, they've already spawned once. But
and we had fish in a foot of water.
Yeah,
foot and a half.
Yep. So the cold front hit, and what happens to the bass when something like this, so cold, so drastic, huge temperature drops in the water and in the air? What do?
There's a couple things that they do, and you know, depending, you know, this is going to apply to lakes all around the country, whether they're super deep or super shallow. Most of the fish do the same thing when something this drastic hits them. And actually, there's three things. They're either going to bury themselves in heavy cover, and this is especially true for pure Florida strain largemouth. If they're a mix or they're northern strain, they tend to not do that, but Florida strain largemouth like to put themselves physically on a piece of cover. I mean, they will bury themselves in the deepest grass, the thickest timber, whatever they can, and physically put the sides or their belly, whatever it is, on that, and hope to soak up some, you know, because post-frontal conditions have a lot of sun.
Yep.
And anything that's going to absorb any sort of heat is going to give them a little extra heat. And as it, you know, I don't know the psychology of it, but they feel secure. A Florida strain largemouth feels secure when it is buried in the thickest cover it can find. And those are the toughest to catch. I mean, Florida strain largemouth are babies, man. I mean, dude, they're whenever there's a front, they're like me. You know, when it gets a little bit cold, I have to wear a lot of layers.
So what I've learned over the years is the way to catch them is to slow way down. Go to the way I like to Ryan might have a little bit different way of doing it, but I like to slow way down, go to a smaller bait, or just a bait that doesn't quite have as much action as what I'm fishing, like a, you know, a trick worm or maybe a finesse worm, and lighter line, and I just fish slower. You know, I may throw a shaky head out there and just literally just barely move it and barely shake it and just slow way down and give them a chance to see it and go up and actually eat it because they want to eat it, because they're feeding. That's typically my first approach.
Or knock them on the head. I mean, you know, you can drop it right in on them, and you know, using if you're you know, are we still talking about these Florida strain largemouth?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know,
actually, no. Let's talk about northern strain largemouth.
Well, I'm talking just finishing up with the Florida strain.
Yep.
You know, you want to use a soft plastic that is going to slip through that heavy cover. So you, like Gene was saying, something that doesn't move pretty much at all. A trick worm is going to slide through. Stick bait. There's I don't really use it much, but like a gambler BB cricket, I think it's called. It's just, or a missile baits, that little craw they have. Just something that's super streamlined. You can punch into these tiny little things and you can get to those fish and either knock them on the head or keep it in their face long enough for they eat, like Gene was saying. Now switching over to hybrid bass, or what would you call it, F1s?
Now let's just go to northern. Yeah, there's not enough of these guys fishing.
Oh yeah, so you know, when you get away from your Florida strain bass, you move up to your northern strain. And they're a lot different post front. They aren't as affected and they act differently. In my experience, they will actually relate more to structure than they will cover. Now, if you have cover on a prime piece of structure, they're going to be around that. But that's where Gene's talking about throwing out a shaky head and fishing it really slow. When you're throwing out there, you know, they're going to be on break lines. And
yeah, they're going to pull out. And what a break line is where the bottom comes out, and all of a sudden, you know, you get the shallow water up here where they were, and all of a sudden the bottom, you know, it just drops a little bit. Not a huge drop. It can be a huge drop. But most of the time, it's just a little drop. Maybe the lake was down many years ago for a long period of time, and that washed out a little drop. It's, you know, they're going to pull out to 8, 10, 12 feet, wherever that little first drop is, and they're going to hang out right on that break line, right close to that deep water. So if it gets colder, they can go deeper. If it gets warmer, they can get up into the shallows quicker and feed.
And also understand that when we say they get deeper, you know, a lot of people think that, you know, a bass can, you know, oh, they're in a 2 or 3 feet of water, it got cold, they shot out to 20 feet. They can't, that takes time for them to do that. They have an air bladder, a swim bladder, and for them to go deeper, they have to, the pressure has to equalize for them, and they can't just shoot deep and stay there. So what happens is even you know, that's why I was talking about lakes of varying depth a little while ago, is that, you know, you can have a pond where, you know, it's kind of bowl shaped, where the deepest part is 5-6 feet. If you can find a section where it drops from 4 to 6, that small, even sometimes even a half a foot drop is really key. And you know, this applies for fish in all stages of the pre-spawn. You have areas of the country where they're at the mouths of the creeks, so the major creek arms, where they're just beginning to migrate into those creek arms. Those fish are pushing up onto those first points that are, you know, entering those creek arms, and they're going to get pushed back off to a break line. If they're deeper in those pockets, you know, down here in Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, you know, all these southern states where they were actually, I mean, we were finding fish at the very ends of pockets. That's when they're going to kind of use the ditches that run into those pockets, and that's how they're going to back off. So, you know, just like we were saying, anywhere you are in the country, you know, wherever you were catching them, just pull out a little bit. And then you got to try and figure out if they're suspended or on the bottom. But that, you know, that's using either your electronics or just using 2 different kind of baits, you know, seeing if they'll hit a jerk bait and come up, or if they're, you know, wanting a jig dragged on the bottom. But for the most part, you know, when fishing for these fish, I mean, I don't know if you're the same way, but it's either super slow
or super fast.
Yep. So you're either looking for a very slow feeding bite, or you're gonna, you know, just trying to coax them into biting by keeping a bait in front of them for a while, or by ripping a bait by them and not really giving them a choice. How about baits, dude? What's some of your favorite? I'm more of the fast fisherman and post front. You're more of the slow fisherman. You know, you like this. So what do you throw?
Oh man,
you know, what's your way to?
Usually, the first thing I'm gonna go to is a shaky head.
Okay.
I don't typically catch them well this time of year on a drop shot. For some reason, I don't know. I mean, I can catch a few, but I don't catch them as well on a drop shot.
Do you think it might have to do with
in pre-spawn,
where they're at on the bottom?
Maybe, and they're feeding on the bottom.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times these fish are keyed in on crawfish in the pre-spawn, and I just think they're looking on the bottom. They're not caring too much about chasing fish, especially in post-frontal conditions, post-cold front conditions. They don't want to chase.
Craw's a lot slower than a shad.
Craw and a worm are a lot easier, a lot better. So I'm going to look at like a plasma tail worm on a shaky head, which is my favorite shaky head worm because it has that little buoyant tail, and it has that. It is. I don't know what's the word. Tantalizing.
Yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, so it really does. To me, I feel like I can get more bites with it. Then maybe a small little finesse jig, 1/4 ounce finesse jig. I'm fishing on a spinning rod and I'm fishing on a medium action bait caster. Are the only two rods I'm going to pull to. Go to lighter line, 8-pound test. You got the new Seagar, what do they call it? The finesse line.
Oh yeah,
you know, and it's like 7.2 pounds of pound test, and they figured out that at that point is where the bass stop being able to see the fluorocarbon line. Heavier fluorocarbon line is visible. It's less visible to bass than comparative to the mono, but it's still visible just because it's so thick.
So what was it? 7.2.
I think it's like 7.2 or anything else.
So they figured out that line is invisible underwater. That pound test and below.
And so they have like 5 point something and 7.2, and that's something I've really started to use when I really need a bite, and the fish are just turned off or they're finicky.
Leave it to the Japanese to figure out that 7 point. So there you have it, folks. Tantalize.
The word of the day.
So jig trails, you throw a finesse jig. I mean, do you want a trailer with a lot of action or little action? I mean,
no. So with jig trailers, I'm not, because I'm downsizing the jig, I'm going to go to a smaller jig, but I don't want a jig that has any chop to it. So I'm going to use something like a little baby speed chunk, or not speed chunk, little baby chunk from Zoom, little I can't remember what they call them, but a little chunk trailer.
Yeah, like a super chunk.
Yeah, like a little super chunk junior that has just very little kick.
Gotcha. Have you thrown the Zoom tiny chunk on a back of a finesse jig, little baby one? I've caught some good ones doing that too. That's one of my favorite trailers to use on like a bitsy bug or something like that.
All right, so what's next?
Okay, so we when we stopped, we actually picked up a little board here. I wanted to draw some things out for you. And then I'm going to talk about, after this, I'm going to talk about how I power fish post-front conditions. But anyway, we just want to kind of show you guys, you know, when the fish are in these pockets and they're in these little creek arms and they're looking to spawn, kind of, you know, some scenarios you might run into and how to approach it. So what we have here is this, you know, a little pocket tapering in, and you have the ditch or little channel here, a couple laydowns. And so what happens is you have fish that are wanting to get in these areas to spawn. They're wanting to get up nice and shallow in those protected spots.
So the main lake is up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so they're looking to spawn there. So what'll happen is you know, you have fish that are, you know, you've been catching them all through here up shallow. You know, that's where you've been throwing your crankbaits, you've been flipping your jigs, and that's when you've been hitting these fish. Well, all that they do is they don't run out of the creek and go back to the main creek or the main lake. What they do is they just simply pull off from where they're at. And so a lot of times what we do is, you know, we'll fish the ends of laydowns. Here's some laydowns I've drawn. You know, they'll pull out to the ends, and sometimes they'll suspend 5 or 10 feet out from this.
Yeah, especially when you have a longer period of cold, they'll actually pull out off of them. They're still located according to the tree or the laydown, but they're going to pull straight out, and they're just going to suspend off of the
So
end of the
they're
tree.
relating to the cover,
Right,
but they're not in the cover.
right.
You know? So then almost every creek arm, I mean, even on lakes that are real silty bottoms, you still usually have some form of a ditch. We said a little earlier that it doesn't matter, even if it's a 6 or 12, you know, 6-inch drop, 12-inch drop, 18-inch drop, sometimes that's all it takes. So when you're catching fish in these areas that I have circled here, these are those target spawning areas, all they're gonna do is what we do is we look for a bend in the ditch or a bend in the channel. And so they're gonna be, you know, they were in here, and they just simply pull out to here, and they'll either hang out on the edge, they'll go down in the ditch, and you just gotta kind of fish to figure it out. Also, if you have, you know, I have some rocks or a couple stumps, they'll pull out to those as well. Let's say they don't wanna, you know, let's say the cold front came through and the fish aren't pulling out all the way to the channel, but there's a stump right here. The fish will just pull out to this stump, and they'll stick themselves right to the side of it. And all you got to do to catch that fish is either drag a jig or a finesse worm by them real slow, or take a crankbait and bang it into that stump a bunch of times to trigger them to bite. So another really good thing to do is when you come into these small pockets, a lot of times what me and Gene do is we'll line up in the center of the pocket, and we will make casts. We'll work our way in and make casts straight down the pocket. And what we're looking to do is cover all that area, and we're hitting bends in the creek channel as we're reeling, and we're figuring out where they're at. So a really good tactic this time of year is to take a crankbait that runs at 6 to 10 feet. Is that, you know, so a 3XD, a Series 5, Rapala DT10, I think they make a DT6, whatever crankbait that you like to throw that hits those depths, throw it right down the center of that pocket, and make sure you cover, you know, a good ways out, you know, make sure you're maintaining bottom contact, and literally work in all the way to where that little pocket completely ends. And I mean, dude, we've caught thousands of fish.
One of my favorite rigs to do that with is actually a rage rig or a creeper. Yep. You know, a jig head, something that's on the bottom that you can drag along the bottom and feel everything. You know, a creeper with a little crawl bait, or a rage rig with the rage crawl, or a, you know, a vile crawl or something on it. And then a slow rolling spinner bait is also an excellent way of doing that. Just depends on their mood. You know, slow crankbait, but I like a spinnerbait a little bit better because I can actually stop it and let it lay on the bottom if it's a hard bottom, and you can catch them off the bottom with a spinnerbait too. So, and
keeping a spinnerbaits on the bottom is really easy. Use a willow blade and use a heavy spinnerbait. Let it sink to the bottom, and then just slow reel it until you barely feel those blades turning. And when Gene's saying a rage rig, what he's talking about is using a belly weighted swim bait hook, and he's rigging a soft plastic on that. And and that technique got popular with Steve Parks, the creator of Rage.
I've got an old Rage rig video that we can post to. It's old.
Okay, so here's how we approach points during these type of conditions. A lot of times with points, here's the point sticking out here, and usually with points there's going to be a deep break somewhere. Sometimes what'll happen is you'll have the creek channel out here, and that sucker will swing right up against that point, and it'll look like that. And that's your deep side. That's where it's falling off really fast. And then this side, you have real slow tapering. And so what you want to do is when a cold front like this hits, you want to hit the deeper side of the point. It doesn't have to have a creek channel swinging next to it. That's a prime location, because the fish can just pull right off, and you can find that using a topographic map. You can use your Navionics card, whatever you use, but an old paper map is great for finding these. And so what we do is we fish a point, just like we explained in some videos earlier. We start it at the front here, and we make casts right down the point. You know, your traditional way. You cast up on the top, pull the bait off. And then we start working our way around. We'll start throwing sideways across it. Then we'll start throwing diagonal across it. And what you're gonna end up with is you're gonna kind of have a grid going on. Diagonal, and hit it from all angles, because eventually you're gonna figure out how those fish are positioned and how they want that bait coming at them. But for the most part, in these post-front conditions, they're gonna be on the steep break over here. I know it's a mess now, but find the steeper break of the point and fish a jig or a shaky head or a Carolina rig with a little worm on it real slow, or you know, you can power fish. Okay, so you got your point and it's tapering down, and here's the surface of the water. Okay, let's say the fish are holding, let's say this is 4 feet right here, all right, and that cold front hits. You're gonna have two different kinds of fish, and this is where power fishing and slowing down of fishing is gonna help you figure out where they're at. You're gonna have fish that pull straight out and suspend in that same 4 foot zone, but they don't want to adjust the depth that they're at. You're also gonna have fish that follow the point down and are gonna stay on the bottom. Let's say that there's a stump right here. They're gonna go and stick on that. It won't be far from where they were, but there's gotta be either some cover. They're either gonna be on the cover, or they're gonna be suspended above it at about the same level. So if you've been really catching them good at 4 to 6 feet, pull off into 10, 15 feet of water and run your bait that deep. What I want to go over is if they're not eating, if you can't coax them into eating by dragging a finesse jig or a downsized worm or any of those rigs that Gene has been so successful with fishing, I like to then force them to eat. They don't have a choice. And so what I like to do this time of year is a lipless crankbait, a build crankbait, a diving crankbait, and a jerkbait are going to be your 3 best friends. And what you want to do is try to figure out if they're suspended or holding near the bottom, and take that crankbait, and that if you're fishing a crankbait or a lipless, you want to run it into as many objects as you can on the bottom. Make it deflect off everything, make it erratic, make it fast, throw a quick pause in there, but just speed reel it, burn it. And what that's doing to the fish is it's triggering that predatory instinct to eat. You know, when there's a bait fish acting crazy, they can't resist eating that shad.
Right.
The jerkbait is really effective for those suspended open water fish, which can be really, really tough to make eat. And all you're gonna do is you're going to crack that jerkbait. I mean, just like a maniac. You want to work the jerkbait super fast, really sharp snaps. You don't have to worry so much about the pauses, because the pauses typically are what coax fish into coming up and eating the bait. This is something where the bait is flying by them at 100 miles an hour, and they're just gonna eat it. It's like they have no choice. They have to come out, and you'll foul hook a lot of fish. A lot of times fish will just come up and bump it, or they'll swipe at it. They don't even really want to eat it. It's just something that they do. So you know, some of my favorites, you know, a Strike King 3XD, Rapala DT10. Just don't hopefully you don't break a bill and come back, you know, hook a good one and come back with just the bill. That's the biggest problem with those crankbaits, man. They're so good, yeah, but they break. It stinks. So that's a good one. As far as lipless go, we like you know, a Spro Armuchee shad, a red eye shad, the 2-tap. Throw a couple different rattles, you know, each bait has its own sound. There might be one that's working that day, and that bait, you know, I'm just going to be burning. Even if I'm yo-yoing it, I'm going to be real aggressive with the yo-yos. And everything is downsized though, and that's one of the reasons why, like with the crankbait, I like the 3XD, is it dives deep, but it's a small profile. The Spro Armuchee shad or a red eye, I'll usually throw in a 1/4 ounce. That's, you know, it's a small presentation, and they seem to respond to it. And then as far as jerkbaits go, it's kind of, again, it's a toss up. There's certain companies that, you know, we really like, and the Strike King 200 series KVD jerkbait and the 300 deep diving jerkbait, depending on, you know, where they're at. That's a great jerkbait, as well as the Spro McStick and the McRip. Those two are phenomenal baits. I like the McRip because it has a real small profile and you can get it down a lot deeper. And as the name suggests, with the rip, it works really well when you just tear the bait. So that's how I power fish in post front conditions.
Yep.
And you just gotta, you know, fish what works for you, and also, you know,
try to match the mood of the fish.
Yeah.
And it's all about where they went to when the weather gets cold. And they don't go far because they want to spawn. They don't want to have to go way back out and come way back in. They just want to pull out where they're comfortable and they feel safe, and then come back in when it warms up.
They're using all their energy to make eggs.
Yep. And where people make their mistake is they want to go back and catch them where they caught them 2 or 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with any cold front, the day after the cold front is usually okay. The mood has changed a little bit, and you usually can catch quite a few of them comparative to the day after that. 2 days after a cold front, it's usually I consider it the toughest day, and then it gets better after that as if you have stable weather. So
it's like being sore from lifting weights.
Yeah, exactly.
The first day is not that bad. The second day sucks.
Yep.
The third day you start to recover.
Exactly. Well, we're almost home, so this is another episode of In the Truck Again.
In the Truck Again.
Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Be sure to check out Ryan's channel. We'll put all the links down in the description because his doesn't have any videos, so it doesn't show up on searches yet.
They will be there soon. I promise you that. I promise you that.
But like I always say, be sure to introduce somebody to fishing. Introduce them to my channel. Let me help you teach them how to fish. More importantly, get out of the water, go out and catch some fish, and have a great day.
See you guys.